December 1942, North Africa. The wind rolled fine Saharan dust across the ridgelines near Tebessa, Algeria. Columns of the US-2 Corps moved east toward the Kasserine Pass, engines humming in chorus. A sea of khaki, dust, and sunlight. Among the convoys were hundreds of small, squat vehicles with flat hoods and round headlights. The Willys MB Jeep. Many German officers observing from their vantage points through field glasses. It looked like a toy. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim of the 5th Panzer Army famously remarked to his adjutant that the Americans seemed to have brought farm wagons to the desert. Yet, within weeks, those same vehicles would astonish the Wehrmacht with a level of mobility and reliability no German light transport could match. The Jeep had entered production barely 2 years earlier, a product of American urgency and industrial standardization. In 1940, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps issued a challenge to the nation's automakers. Design a general-purpose, four-wheel-drive reconnaissance vehicle that weighed under 1,300 pounds and could be built in massive numbers. Out of 135 bids, only 3 companies stepped forward: American Bantam, Willys Overland, and Ford. What emerged from their combined effort was the Willys MB, a compact 2,450-pound, 60-horsepower utility vehicle with the legendary Go Devil engine. By late 1942, tens of thousands of Jeeps had reached North Africa. Soldiers loved them. They carried radios, supplies, medical stretchers, and even towed 37mm anti-tank guns. Where larger trucks bogged down in sand or mud, the Jeep's short wheelbase and low gearing kept it moving. A U.S. sergeant from the 1st Armored Division recalled, "If you had fuel, your Jeep would get you there. No question." German engineers studying captured Jeeps at Tunis were astonished. The vehicle's simplicity defied their design philosophy. Where a Kübelwagen used precise engineering and air-cooled components, the Jeep relied on brute practicality. Parts were stamped, interchangeable, and cheap. Bolts were standardized. Even a damaged chassis could be replaced in hours. The idea of a throwaway vehicle designed to be used hard and easily replaced was alien to the meticulous but resource-intensive German industry. Reports recovered from the Oberkommando de Heer's archives describe German technical evaluations of the Jeep. One noted that the American vehicle was not of refined design, but exhibited a practical balance between strength, weight, and reliability. Another officer wrote, "Its success is in its simplicity. It functions under conditions where our light vehicles fail." At the front, this simplicity became a tactical advantage. During the chaotic fighting near Sidi Bou Zid in February 1943, Jeeps ferried reconnaissance teams between U.S. and British units, darting between wadis and ridgelines beyond the range of heavy vehicles. German panzer grenadiers were stunned to see these small machines scaling rough terrain where no Kübelwagen could follow. Soon, word spread through the Afrika Korps. Soldiers began repainting captured Jeeps in Wehrmacht gray, marking them with black crosses and using them for patrols or messenger duties. Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel reportedly used a captured Willys Jeep for short trips. Impressed by its speed and maneuverability in the deserts of North Africa, the German perception of American industry began to shift. What had seemed crude now proved revolutionary. The Jeep was not a luxury of design. It was a declaration of industrial philosophy. Build more, build faster, and make it work anywhere. By spring 1943, over 100,000 Jeeps were already in service. And as the war expanded to Sicily, Italy, and Normandy, these small machines would soon redefine mobility on every front and force the German war machine to confront a truth it had long ignored. July 10, 1943, the southern coast of Sicily. As dawn broke over the beaches near Gela, the thunder of naval guns faded into the whine of aircraft and the steady grind of engines disembarking from landing craft. Among the first vehicles to roll ashore were the same small four-wheeled machines that had astonished German officers months earlier, the Willys MB Jeeps of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Within hours, the beaches were alive with motion. Jeeps crisscrossed the sand, ferrying ammunition, stretchers, and radio operators through the chaos. British and American troops used them to move through narrow, winding Sicilian roads where heavier vehicles struggled. The German defenders, elements of the Hermann Göring Division and the 15th Panzergrenadier Division, quickly noticed how these little vehicles seemed to be everywhere at once. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, writing from the Sicilian front, described how a Jeep could do more in a day than a convoy of trucks could do in 3. He noted that you'd see them hauling water, pulling trailers, even carrying officers' desks across fields. The Jeep's versatility was unmatched. Engineers had already learned they could mount radios, machine guns, or even wire reels on them. Medics turned them into mobile ambulances. Artillery crews used them as forward observers' transport. German records from the period confirmed their growing respect. A report from the 15th Panzergrenadiers quartermaster in late July noted, "The American light vehicle Willys is capable of sustained operation over broken terrain with little mechanical difficulty. Captured units have been pressed into service with satisfactory results." At least 200 captured Jeeps were catalogued and reused by the Wehrmacht during the Sicilian and Italian campaigns. They were repainted, re-stenciled, and even fitted with German jerry cans and field tools. For the first time, German soldiers were experiencing the practical genius of American mass production firsthand. The psychological impact was also clear. Many Wehrmacht officers, trained under the meticulous mechanical traditions of pre-war Germany, were bewildered by how cheaply made parts could outperform precision engineering in wartime. The Kübelwagen, designed by Ferdinand Porsche and built by Volkswagen, was efficient and reliable, but it lacked the Jeep's raw adaptability. Its rear-wheel drive layout and low ground clearance limited its off-road use, especially in mud or snow. The Jeep, by contrast, could traverse nearly any surface, from beach sand to mountain passes by late August. As Axis forces retreated from Sicily to the Italian mainland, Jeeps became the connective tissue of the Allied advance. American and British units coordinated movements faster than ever before. The lightweight vehicles allowed supply officers, artillery spotters, and field commanders to keep pace with rapidly changing battle lines. The Allies had turned mobility into an operational weapon. Back in Germany, engineers and officers reviewed reports with disbelief. The Technical Office of the Waffenamt, German Army Ordnance Office, commissioned several assessments of the Willys MB in late 1943. One engineer noted bluntly, "The Americans have understood something we did not. The purpose of a vehicle is not perfection, but persistence." Even German propaganda acknowledged it. In one internal Wehrmacht circular, soldiers were instructed not to destroy captured Jeeps unnecessarily, as their continued use provides logistical advantage to frontline troops. It was a rare admission of American superiority in any field of engineering. As autumn 1943 approached, and as the Allied armies prepared to push through the Apennines, the Jeep was no longer dismissed as a novelty. It had become the symbol of a different kind of power, the industrial and logistical might that would soon drive the Axis into retreat. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. At dawn, Allied landing craft crashed through rough surf toward the beaches. Behind the waves of infantry, the ramps of flat-bottomed LSTs opened, releasing the first vehicles onto the sand, tanks, trucks, and weaving deftly between them, the unmistakable silhouettes of Willys MB Jeeps. It was D-Day. And from the moment the first Jeep's tires met French soil, the machine that had proven itself in the deserts and mountains began its defining chapter in Europe. Eyewitness accounts describe how Jeeps immediately transformed the battlefield's rhythm. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Cawthon of the U.S. 116th Infantry Regiment recalled that his unit's communications remained intact only because the Jeeps could get through where everything else was pinned down. When trucks bogged in the wet sand or artillery craters, Jeeps bounced and jolted forward, carrying messages, medics, and munitions under fire. For German troops defending the coast, notably units of the 716th Infantry Division and the 21st Panzer Division, the speed with which Allied coordination stabilized the invasion came as a shock. Reports captured after the war show that Wehrmacht observers couldn't understand how the Allies maintained supply flow under such chaotic conditions. The answer, visible everywhere behind the lines, was mechanical and simple. The Jeep. Within 24 hours of the landings, over 3,000 Jeeps had been brought ashore. Their drivers, from engineers to chaplains, treated them like extensions of their own boots. Mechanics could disassemble and reassemble one in the field in less than 8 hours. Replacement parts came in abundance. Nearly every bolt and bracket was standardized. When a Jeep broke down, soldiers often stripped one for parts and revived another, a process the German forces, bound by strict mechanical tolerances, could scarcely believe possible. German engineers examined captured Jeeps once again during the Normandy campaign. According to reports archived in Koblenz, one officer wrote, "The American vehicle cannot be compared to our designs. It is crude, but evidently its crudeness is the reason for its success. Every part is replaceable, every surface accessible, every defect reparable in the field." By late June, the Jeep had become the beating heart of the Allied advance beyond the beaches. It scouted ahead of armored divisions, carried forward observers for the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, and even transported priests and Red Cross workers through shelled villages. German civilians and resistance members also noticed. The sight of the small, open-bodied vehicles rumbling into liberated towns became a symbol of the new army sweeping across Europe, practical, fast, and unstoppable. A French civilian in Isigny-sur-Mer described in her diary, "They came not in mighty machines, but in these little cars, flying our flags, smiling as they passed. Freedom rode in those cars." As the Allies pushed through the hedgerows of Normandy, Jeeps were modified for every conceivable role. Some carried wire reels for the signal corps. Others were outfitted with .30 caliber machine guns for reconnaissance patrols. The British SAS famously used stripped-down Jeeps loaded with twin Vickers K guns to raid German airfields across occupied France. Meanwhile, German divisions began to collapse under the pressure of Allied mobility. While the Wehrmacht still relied heavily on horse-drawn wagons for transport, the Americans were using Jeeps to coordinate movements over hundreds of kilometers. What German officers had once dismissed as a disposable toy was now the keystone of a logistical network that stretched from the beaches to the front lines. By the time Paris was liberated in August 1944, over 200,000 Jeeps were in Europe. Each one represented not only American industrial ingenuity but a new approach to warfare, mobility through simplicity. And as the Allied columns crossed the Seine, German engineers began to confront a sobering truth. The Jeep wasn't just a machine. It was proof that efficiency, not elegance, would win the modern war. Autumn 1944, Western Front. As the Wehrmacht fell back across France and the Low Countries, a curious sight began to appear on German supply roads. Allied Jeeps, painted in field gray, marked with black Bokenkreuz crosses, and sometimes fitted with captured MG-34s. To the untrained eye, they blended into German convoys. To the Allied pilots above, they were a sign that even the enemy now depended on the very vehicle they once mocked. By this point, German capture and reuse of Allied Jeeps had become common practice. From the deserts of North Africa to the Ardennes forests, captured Willys MBs and Ford GPWs were pressed into service across the Reich. Reports from the Oberkommando de Heers, OKH, Logistics Division in late 1944 recorded hundreds of Jeeps registered under the designation Butfahrzeug, Jeep, U.S. Captured vehicle, Jeep, U.S. They were prized not only by frontline officers but also by communication units, reconnaissance detachments, and even medical teams who found the vehicle's versatility unmatched. One of the most striking examples came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Under Operation Greif, German commando units led by SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny used captured Allied vehicles, including several Jeeps, to infiltrate American lines. These units, dressed in U.S. uniforms, caused confusion and delayed Allied movements in the first days of the offensive. Although their operation was ultimately limited in scale, it underscored a remarkable irony. The Germans had come to rely on the very machines that symbolized Allied mobility. Captured Jeep manuals and parts lists were circulated among Wehrmacht mechanics, who noted with fascination how few tools were required for repairs. A 1944 field report from Panzergruppe West stated, The American Jeep can be maintained by ordinary soldiers with minimal instruction. Simplicity of design allows continued operation under severe conditions where our light transport cannot function. In contrast, Germany's own light vehicles, such as the Volkswagen Kübelwagen and Schwimmwagen, required more specialized parts and were less forgiving under battlefield stress. Their air-cooled engines performed well in the east, but struggled with mud and water in the Western Front's wet climate. Meanwhile, Jeeps continued to roll through it all. Their electrical systems shielded, their engines sealed, and their frames designed for punishment. Even the Luftwaffe adapted Jeeps for use at airfields. Captured Willys MBs, repainted with yellow nose markings and Luftwaffe insignia, towed aircraft or transported aircrew across bomb-damaged runways. Photographs recovered from Le Bourget and Wunstorf air bases show German personnel posing beside them. Unmistakable American shapes bearing German emblems. For soldiers on both sides, the Jeep had transcended its nationality. It was no longer just an Allied vehicle. It was a tool of war so efficient that even the enemy respected it. German propaganda occasionally attempted to downplay this, referring to the Jeep as a temporary improvisation of the Americans. But the reality in the field was impossible to ignore. By late 1944, as Allied forces crossed into Belgium and the Netherlands, American engineers introduced small modifications, winterization kits, improved tires, and better lighting for convoys. Yet the basic design remained unchanged. It was still a 60-horsepower, four-cylinder engine pushing a 2,450-pound frame through snow, mud, and rubble, and still outpacing more complex German machinery. The contrast was becoming symbolic of the larger war itself, the German pursuit of mechanical perfection versus the American mastery of practicality and scale. Where the Axis built excellence in isolation, the Allies built sufficiency by the million, and the Jeep was its purest expression. By the closing months of 1944, even as fuel shortages crippled German logistics, captured Jeeps still ran on scavenged supplies, carrying dispatches between collapsing front lines. Their continued presence on both sides of the front demonstrated a simple truth that German engineers could no longer deny. This humble machine had redefined mobility, warfare, and design itself. May 7, 1945, Reims, France. Inside the red brick schoolhouse that now served as Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, German General Alfred Jodl signed the unconditional surrender of all German forces. Outside, on the cobblestone streets, the world's most unassuming symbol of victory rolled quietly past celebrating soldiers. The Willys MB Jeep. By war's end, over 640,000 Jeeps had been produced by Willys Overland and Ford under government contract. They had crossed deserts, jungles, beaches, and bombed cities. From the sands of El Alamein to the snows of Bastogne, the Jeep had proven itself indispensable, not because it was beautiful, but because it was built with a purpose the world had underestimated. When German engineers were later interviewed by Allied technical missions in 1945, many expressed genuine admiration for the American approach to design. At the Automotive Evaluation Center in Göttingen, one captured German automotive engineer reportedly said, "We spent years chasing precision. The Americans built abundance, and it was abundance that won." This mindset that rugged reliability could triumph over refinement became one of the quiet revolutions of 20th century engineering. German officers who once dismissed the Jeep as a toy had seen entire campaigns shaped by its mobility. The Wehrmacht's early victories had relied on mechanized coordination and blitzkrieg speed. By 1944, it was the Allies, riding in millions of standardized, mass-produced vehicles, who embodied that same doctrine with far greater reach. In occupied and liberated Europe alike, Jeeps soon became icons of freedom and rebuilding. Civilians used them to transport food, mail, and medicine through war-torn villages. In France and the Netherlands, children waved at convoys of Jeeps carrying Red Cross volunteers and chaplains. British Major General Brian Horrocks later wrote that, "Nothing symbolized liberation like the sound of a Jeep coming down a village road." The U.S. Army recognized its significance immediately. The Jeep's lineage continued in the post-war years, transforming into the Willys CJ, civilian Jeep, the first civilian model designed for farms, factories, and reconstruction projects. Surplus military Jeeps were sold or donated worldwide, from the Philippines to Greece, becoming the backbone of rural transport and early post-war economies. Meanwhile, captured German records confirmed how extensively the Wehrmacht had adopted the Jeep by the war's end. Reports from late April 1945 noted entire German staff units operating with salvaged Jeeps, often painted over multiple times as front lines shifted. It was a quiet testament to the machine's endurance. It served its makers and its captors alike, outlasting both ideologies. In the years that followed, automotive engineers around the world studied the Willys MB as a case study in efficient design. Its flat fenders, short wheelbase, and fold-down windshield became instantly recognizable symbols of practicality. The principles behind it, standardization, interchangeability, and ease of maintenance, influenced post-war military and civilian vehicles across continents. Even in Germany, companies such as Volkswagen, MAN, and Mercedes-Benz would later incorporate lessons learned from studying the Jeep's production philosophy: simplicity, scalability, and repairability in the field. The very engineers who once dismissed it as crude now understood that it had been decades ahead of its time. By the end of World War II, the Jeep was more than a military vehicle. It was the physical embodiment of a new kind of warfare, one powered not by luxury or precision, but by logistics, innovation, and accessibility. As historian John Keegan later observed, the Jeep was to World War II what the horse had been to earlier centuries, the symbol of motion, freedom, and endurance. From the dunes of North Africa to the ruins of Berlin, its small engine carried not just soldiers, but the momentum of an industrial age that could outbuild, outmove, and ultimately outlast the mightiest army Europe had ever produced. The Germans couldn't believe it at first. By the time they did, the Jeep had already changed the war and the world that followed.